Welcome to Foster the Podcast. I am your host, Foster the Prankster. This is episode 1, and we are going to have a pretty controversial conversation today, man. If you have followed me throughout my music career or on Twitter, social media, you'll know that I'm not really afraid to touch third rail topics and hot button issues and kind of get my piece off and try to get down to the nitty gritty of things. So today I really want to, just because of a lot of the things I've been seeing go on in the culture and a lot of articles that have been written over the past week, past couple weeks, I think we need to have a conversation about the relationship between Black and Jewish people in America. And so, when you're having these tough conversations, nowadays you always have to preface with, the disclaimers, and I don't hate any groups. There are individuals which I strongly dislike, but as far as like hating groups of people, that's not really my style. Nothing that we're going to go over today has anything to do with anti-Semitism, or hatred of Jews. There's plenty of Jewish people who I, admire their work. Artists, musicians, Stanley Kubrick's, the Jerry Seinfeld's, Simon and Garfunkel. There's so much stuff that Jewish people have contributed to the culture that I really love. So, this really has nothing to do with hate, and it's all about just having an open dialogue, man. Because I've been seeing so much vitriol spewed toward Black folks in light of all the things that have been going on recently. And I just think we need to talk about it, man. So first I want to say, Black Americans are in no way responsible for the events that took place in Germany, more than 80 years ago. If the Jewish community has a problem with any Americans over, the Holocaust and that event, I feel like they should have a lot more smoke toward like the IBMs and the JP Morgans, whereas you never hear the Jewish community calling out like Prescott Bush and, the Bush family for being so involved and invested. There was a Nazi rally held at Madison Square Garden. Why are we not calling for, Madison Square Garden to be torn down or anything like that? But there's always this sort of like laser focus on, as soon as Black people have something to say, we become targets and we become, open for degradation and criticism, and that we're all just anti-Semitic. And this is a conversation that's been going on in the Black community, between the Black and Jewish communities for, generations. I can't really think of too many Black people who have never heard this conversation being had by our elders and people in the community. And so I just feel that it's wrong that we are targeted when we have an opinion on the way we feel we've been treated by Jewish people. Next, I've always found it sort of disturbing that Black Americans are consistently told to just get over slavery, and that the idea of reparations is ridiculous. And personally, I used to oppose the idea of monetary reparations, because I was like, well, how do you know? How do you, who's going to do the legwork to go back and decide who is owed what and all this type of stuff? But when I did research, I found out that Jewish survivors of the Holocaust and their beneficiaries, after they've passed away, those people collect reparations from the German government to this day, 80 plus years later. So, since then I've always wondered, like, why are Black Americans the exception? Considering the horrors of slavery and the fact that the most powerful economy in world history was built on that free labor, and that, America benefited from greatly going into the Industrial Revolution. The destruction of whole lineages and ancestries of Black people, the forced breeding like livestock to genetically select for desired mental and physical traits. That's the kind of changing an entire people's gene pool. and obviously the violence and just the complete subjugation of black people, including like all the way up through the mid to late 20th century with stuff like redlining and Jim Crow and all the things that we talk about in the culture regularly. And people will say, well, money won't fix the black community. And it's like, well, why not let us find out for ourselves? Why not give black Americans a leg up for once, and let us reinvest in our communities and our young people and see if we can't make a difference, because nobody's going to fight for you like you fight for yourself. And I think that that's a major, that's a major issue in the way that the alliance between black and white Jewish people, has evolved over the years. I hate to make blanket statements and kind of like put things on people, but I do think that a major aspect of this has to do, the reason that the Holocaust is looked at so differently in American culture, I think has a lot to do with the fact that that white people of European descent can see themselves in the white Jewish victims of the Holocaust. There's a humanity there that's still sort of not afforded to black and brown people in the same way. The white people can see their grandparents and their kids and their family members. They can see that connection with white European Jews. And so I think that's part of why in our culture it's kind of looked at as this, like, that's the ultimate evil that's ever existed in human history, is the Holocaust. That's the worst thing that ever happened. Meanwhile, there are plenty of genocides that a lot of them that we don't even learn about in the public school system, because there's so much emphasis on the Holocaust from like grades like 3 through all the way through high school. I mean, it's something that is consistently taught. But we hardly ever learn about things like the Armenian genocides or, India or, Darfur or things like this. And, I think that's part of this major disconnect when we talk about slavery and the Holocaust. And I'm not even going to like, try to play the victim Olympics game and like which one is better or worse, because, it's all terrible. But I just feel like from the Jewish side of things, that is the card from which they consistently play. And while, again, black people are told to get over slavery, there's no end to the amount of times that you can use the Holocaust and anti-Semitism as a cover to be able to sort of like dodge criticism in the Jewish community. But with all that said, we're going to get into a little bit of history as it pertains to this disconnect in black and Jewish relations. And, I know there's a lot of talk and a lot of commentary about the overrepresentation of Jewish people in the transatlantic slave trade and things like this. And I'm not going to speak on that in this particular podcast or episode, because I don't know enough about it. I haven't done enough of the research to really be able to like confirm or deny that. I just know that there are accusations that have been made by black and Jewish scholars and academics that say that, Jewish people overwhelmingly controlled or had a major part in being slave merchants. But my particular area of discussion or expertise or study or whatever you want to call it, is more in the counterculture and revolutionary space. That's kind of a topic that I've been very interested in since, from like late middle school through high school through my adult life. That's a lot of the like reading and the things that I've researched. So I'm going to kind of start with that, and we'll go to like the NAACP, the founding of that organization, which is like the, late 19th or early 20th century, something like 1913, I believe. And, out of the five founders of the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, only one of the founders was actually black, which is W.E.B. Du Bois. The majority of the leadership and funding for the organization came from white Jews, many of which happened to be communists. And Marcus Garvey who was the, Jamaican revolutionary separatist, he sort of thought that like he was in favor of segregation, thought that, black and white people essentially should stay separate, that black people needed to practice self-determination and self-empowerment, and basically separate themselves from white people. And I don't agree with all of Marcus Garvey's opinions on things. He was against race mixing, and so obviously in his mind I would be on the chopping block because I'm as a biracial male. But he famously stated that the NAACP was a white organization and stormed out of an NAACP meeting, and so that's kind of the history that this organization has with the black community. To this day, their primary claim for like what they've done or the achievements for black people, one of their primary claims is that they eradicated lynching. And so to me, like that, first of all, that's kind of a dubious claim because like, what do you base that on? And like lynching is murder, so it's already illegal. Are you saying that you made it, like culturally unpopular, or like what is the actual claim? And I think that if you are a quote unquote advancement for, organizations for the advancement of black people, and you've been around for like 100 years and you're still riding off of like, oh, we eradicated lynching. And it's kind of like you probably didn't do that much for the black community if that's kind of your central, your central achievement. And, so we can also go to, the 60s with the civil rights movement. And when, a lot of these black militant groups started rising up, like the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, who, had education programs and really was about, again, like black self-empowerment and the black community kind of coming together and, being its own entity and its own ecosystem, sort of. They had free breakfast programs for kids. They had, a lot of different things. And they were sort of, a white Jewish liberal group known as the SDS, the Students for Democratic Society, who later splintered into an organization called the Weathermen or the Weather Underground, a former member of which is Bill Ayers, who was a big advisor to Obama when he was running for president. But the SDS and the Weathermen both had overwhelming Jewish leadership, and they sort of attempted to form an alliance, let's say, with the Black Panther Party. And I put alliance in quotes because when you do the research, it does seem as though it was more of an infiltration and an attempt to radicalize the Panthers. After they affiliated with the SDS and the Weathermen, the Panthers definitely became a little bit more open about violence against white people and violence against, overthrowing the U.S. government, which was a major thing that the Weathermen wrote about and talked about. And sort of the Panthers now wanting to go to war with like police forces and things like this, all of which were like detrimental to the movement. And a lot of the Weathermen, a lot of the members of the Weathermen ended up coming out as like FBI informants and things like this. And the Panthers later distanced themselves from the Weathermen and described them as dangerous and opportunistic, which is a theme that, will continue with other black revolutionary figures. Malcolm X famously criticized white Jews as exploitive of the black community, pointing out that there were many white Jews on the boards of black organizations, but that no black folks would ever be allowed to lead Jewish organizations like B'nai B'rith, which, if you can do a lot of research, that's a deep rabbit hole to go down as far as Jewish control and supremacy within our culture today even. And Malcolm also criticized that Jews controlled the vast majority of businesses in black communities. I have a clip here that we'll play real quick.
Anti-Semitic.
You've many of the things that I've read about you, and you've made it mention a couple of times about the Jews and everything, and I'm wondering if you are personally anti-Semitic.
No. How can I be anti-Semitic when the Arabs are half the Muslim world is Semitic? If I was anti-Semitic, I'd be anti-Arab and anti-everything else. No, I think that in this country, there's one mistake that the Jews make, they put themselves in a position where whenever anybody gives an objective analysis of the role that they play, they defend themselves by accusing you of being anti-Semitic. And a Negro is not anti-Semitic when he says that the man who's exploiting him in his community is white, because it is a white man who owns all the stores. Now, is it an accident that these whites who own these stores are Jewish? If it's an accident, then the fact that he says the Jew on the corner is exploiting me isn't an anti-Semitic statement. It's just more descriptive of the man who's exploiting him.
Are you anti?
So, you know, you kind of have it in a nutshell right there. You know, and that's sort of a theme, is this idea that black people are allowed to have resentment toward white people. That's encouraged, right? Hate white people. White people are the ones keeping you down, etc. But the irony is that there's this one very specific group of white folks that you're never allowed to criticize, especially as a black person, it seems like. Stokely Carmichael wrote, "It is, for example, the exploitation of Jewish landlords and merchants that first created black resentment toward Jews, not Judaism." And he was also a vocal anti-Zionist, pointing out the hypocrisy of Jewish involvement in black liberation movements while supporting the state of Israel's oppression of Palestinians. And again, this is a theme that goes back. People think that this is some new thing, that black people have just been radicalized overnight, and that they, you know, it's just this hatred for Jews and this anti-Semitism that just persists within black culture. And it's like, no, if you go back and do research on so many of these black militant and revolutionary figures and organizations, you realize that they all eventually come to this point where they start to question Zionism and the oppression and murder of Palestinians, and sort of espousing this solidarity with Palestine, because they identify this idea of like speaking out of both sides of your mouth. Like, how can you say that you're for the advancement and the liberation of black people in America, meanwhile you're participating in this conflict that is, again, oppressing and murdering the Palestinian people? And you know, it's unfortunate that, again, that we can't have this conversation without being accused of hatred, because I think that it's so important, again, because of how long this has been going on. And so we'll fast forward to, you know, more recent events, the Black Lives Matter organization, which, you know, personally I never, you know, supported. You know, I think Black Lives Matter, the organization, the business, if you want to call it, the brand, I think it was a fraud, man. And, you know, a lot of the guys who were involved in the grassroots part of it when it first started, you know, guys who were in Ferguson, Missouri, and all these places, a lot of those guys ended up dying under, you know, sort of mysterious circumstances, and it was taken over by these like academic black folks and these sort of like race grifters who just used it to profit personally. And, you know, again, what has it resulted in? What change, you know, what has BLM done for the black community? And it, you know, the organization is largely, or was largely, funded and organized by white Jews and other white Jewish organizations, and used to promote these Marxist communist ideas, like with critical race theory and white guilt and, you know, destroying capitalism and all this stuff. And, you know, on the other side, they also glorified and sort of uplifted some of these sort of controversial black deaths that were exploited by the media. You know, there are plenty of very, you know, that are legit like sympathetic cases of police brutality, and, you know, the Elijah McClain thing, the autistic kid that was killed. Tamir Rice is one that I personally hold very close to my heart, because that little boy did not in any way deserve to be rolled up on and shot like a dog for playing with a toy gun. You know, and so you know, stories like that are the ones that I really think highlighted the message of what the Black Lives Matter crowd sort of stood for. But then you throw in sort of like these gray area ones, like George Floyd, for instance, which I don't personally don't think that case is as cut and dry as people want to make it out to be, man. You know, I sat and watched that body cam footage from beginning to end, and personally, as someone who's dealt with police, you know, essentially police brutality and police force. Personally, when I watched his interaction, I'm sort of like, bro, like he escalated the situation at every possible like fork in the road. Like he took it to, from sort of arguing and sort of not putting his hands behind his back and take me out of the car, put me on the ground. And it's like you have to acknowledge the ripple effects of your actions. And who knows if he was high or not at the time. Maybe that was a factor in his decision making. He might have been inhibited. I don't personally know. But I think that putting cases like that at the I think that the black community took that situation further than it should have gone. There never should have, I don't think, been buildings on fire over someone like George Floyd, who had robbed a pregnant woman at gunpoint, who was a habitual hard drug user. Not saying that those things excuse, I'm not saying he deserves to be murdered or killed for any of that stuff. But what I am saying is that when you ignore the reality and the facts of the situation and the character of the person, and you just uplift them because they're black, it makes us look crazy. To like it all it does is it incites resentment from black people, and it makes white America look at us like y'all are all just criminals or apologists for criminals, and you don't care about what these people have actually done. All you care about is the fact that they're black and the person who might have killed them are white. And what about black on black crime? And that's part of this thing, is that black people have these conversations. I don't, when the difference between, I think, the way black and Jewish people are treated in the public discourse is that black people criticize our own community, right? Everybody criticizes us, but black people are also willing to hold ourselves accountable and have these conversations. We talk about black on black crime, and we talk about the epidemic of single parenthood in the black community. We sort of own up to our faults and our shortcomings, but it seems like Jewish people, you're never allowed to publicly question anything that they've done or any pattern or behavior that seems to a tendency that they seem to have. You're never allowed to talk about that, but we are always on the chopping block. And so, with all this stuff with the Jewish involvement in the civil rights movement and BLM and all these interactions, there's this like implication that white Jews have given us something, that they've given us opportunity, and that they've been allies, and that they stood up for us. And because of this, black Americans are expected to be their loyal pets. We're not allowed to have an opinion or a mind of our own. We're just supposed to fall in line with whatever they do, because it's like, well, we were the only white people that were willing to stand up for you, which is not actually true. And so you fast forward to today, you have situations like the Kanye West thing, stuff that's been going on for over a year now. Last year, Kanye, made some comments, said some things, didn't really articulate himself very precisely, and his bank accounts were frozen. He lost his deal with Adidas, which, again, we'll go back to is another weird thing, because Adidas, I believe, was either founded by not literal Nazis, or it was in some way invested in the Nazi party. And it's like, okay, where's the smoke for Adidas? It's like, where is the boycott Adidas? It's just, get the black guy out of here. Get the loudmouth black guy out of here, and, we'll go on with business as usual. The way Lex Friedman spoke to Kanye during that whole situation when he had him on his podcast, sort of just condescending and talking down to him like he was his son or something like that. Like, no, you will defer to me as authority, and you will practice some sort of like decorum, or, this sort of like you will follow our moral compass, and the people who did this to you aren't Jews. Stop saying they're Jews. They're just people. And maybe they happen to be affiliated with Judaism, right? And it never works that way when it's, a conversation about black people. And so this is like the sort of gaslighting technique that's used by the white Jewish community on outspoken blacks consistently, is if we call them to task on their actions, or our perception of their relationship to black America, they deflect by calling us anti-Semitic. They claim that our negative interactions are just a few people. that they're, the affiliation with Jews is irrelevant. And when all of that fails, they'll just claim that we're conspiratorial, that we're seeing patterns that don't exist, and that these observations are based in some sort of pathology, right? It's classic gaslighting. Kyrie Irving was forced to apologize. All he did was post a link to a documentary that was available on Amazon. And again, no backlash against Amazon for carrying or distributing the documentary. It was all focused on the black guy needs to apologize. He needs to pay us. He needs to, he's suspended from however many games or whatever. Like, it's just, again, this consistent thing of just punishing black people for having an opinion or an idea. Candace Owens is another case she recently spoke out against the U.S. involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and was talking about how, we should focus on ourselves first and we shouldn't be funding this war. And, one of the co-founders of her own media organization was caught on video that's calling her despicable, saying that, she can leave the Daily Wire if she's got a problem. Just recently, another of the co-founders of the Daily Wire, Jeremy Boring, appeared on Tim Pool's show, and we have a clip of that. And I guess this was like basically an example of cancel culture and, how Americans should fight cancel culture. But let's get into this one real quick.
Here's the problem. The problem is that anonymity on the internet allows for the ghettoizing of beliefs that are not approved by the regime. So a lot of people will say, well, I have to be anonymous on the internet because if my boss finds out that I've got these views, they'll fire me. But you're only in the position where your boss could fire you for finding out about those views because you've allowed those views to be completely ghettoized through anonymity online. If 5 million people came out today and said the N-word, I'm not recommending it, but no one would ever get fired for saying the N-word again.
Like they wouldn't be able to.
You wouldn't be able to. You would have brought that to a conclusion. That little absurdity in our culture would be brought to an end. The ghettoizing of our.
So you kind of see it right there. Why is that his example, right? Why that's the final frontier for freedom is if everyone just says the N-word, then that absurdity in our culture would just disappear. Why is that your example? Why don't you just use your own people as an example? Why not say, if people were able to speak out about the disproportionate amount of Jewish people who lead our Congress and who are the heads of major corporations and who were leaders in the public health sector that perpetuated the erosion of our constitutional rights behind the COVID psychological operation, and were so involved in pushing experimental vaccines and forcing people to take them or trying to force people to take them. Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about the predilection or the idea that there are a lot of Jewish child sex offenders, or sex offenders in general, right? The Harvey Weinsteins, you got Roman Polanski, Jeffrey Epstein, the fact that Israel harbors and provides sanctuary to Jewish pedophiles and sex offenders from around the world. If you are Jewish, you can seek sanctuary in Israel and not be convicted of your sex crimes in other places. That's not a thing, right? He won't use the example of calling out his own people in order to break down a barrier of cancel culture or of censorship. He has to use, if we could just say whatever we want about black people, then, things would start to fix. Come on, man. Like, cut it out. Enough is enough. And black folks are often targeted in media outlets. You see this in alternative media, social media. We are so targeted by these outlets and these organizations or corporations that are a lot of times owned and or operated by white Jews as thugs, as violent animals. Meanwhile, a film like Oppenheimer is one of the biggest films of the year, is about a Jewish communist who comes up with the atomic bomb that slaughters over 200,000 people. nobody's talking about, Jewish proclivity to violence or why, Jewish intellect would be put towards endeavors of genocide and slaughtering a lot of people overseas. What's happening right now in Israel and Palestine, based on Israel killing over 10,000 civilians, a lot of whom are women and children. We're not talking about why is there this Jewish proclivity to brutal violence. About it's, black kids in Chicago are shooting each other, or, a black kid beat up a white kid at school or whatever, which those things are wrong, of course. But why is it that it's pushed that it's because black people are inherently violent and inherently that there's always just something wrong with us?
So we got another clip we're going to get into. This one is of actress Juliana Margulies, who is probably best known for the 90s hospital drama ER. She also did a bit role on The Sopranos back in the day. And she just did a podcast interview where she really was kind of going after black activists who, I guess, disagreed with the Israel-Palestine conflict. So let's take a look at this one here.
There was a film being shown by this black lesbian club on Columbia campus, and they put signs up that said "No Jews allowed." And as someone who plays a lesbian journalist on the morning show, I'm more offended by it as a lesbian than I am as a Jew, to be honest with you, because I want to say to them, you fucking idiots. You don't exist. Like, you're even lower than the Jews. A, you're black, and B, you're gay. And you're turning your back against the people who support you?
So, there it is right there, like blatantly, this idea that, we owe them something. We owe them some sort of allegiance or, to not have our own opinions. And, the condescension of the language and the tone of just, you're even lower than the Jews. First of all, what does that mean? Because there are plenty of black Muslims. So not all Muslims hate black people. I'm not sure where she got that. And there are plenty of black Jews. And then, just on the flip side of that, this woman has been famous for pretty much my entire life. And I had no idea that she was Jewish. Like, this whole time I'm thinking she's Italian. So, which is a consistent thing. A lot of times you meet Jewish people and they just look like a white person. Like, you would never know. And then, not to mention there are plenty of white Jewish people who have come out against the Israel-Palestine thing. It's not just a black thing. Dave Smith, the comedian, has been going on a tear. He's been just one of the most objective sort of commentators on this whole Israel-Palestine thing. And I had to give props to him because he's really been like doing deep dives on like the history of the founding of Israel, or the settling really of Israel, or the colonialism. And, guys like Gaber Mate, who I believe is a Holocaust survivor, Norman Finkelstein, and they just, all of these examples that just get, they're self-hating Jews, or they're anti-Semitic too. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, there's just no excuse for this level of like censorship and hatred of any other contradicting or disagreeing opinion. And again, man, like, this all just, it comes back to the skepticism of black people as to why so many of our political and cultural movements have been funded and infiltrated by this group of people. And then whenever we have a disagreement, we just get attacked. It doesn't make sense. You look at hip hop and the way that it started out as sort of this positive cultural force and socially conscious and revolutionary, and how, it's been spoken about before, how many Jewish record executives sort of were able to warp and distort over time what hip hop represents and what it is to the general public and people who don't understand the culture. And you look at the way that it's been commodified and commercialized now, and it's a shadow of itself. It just promotes the most degenerate, stereotypical images of Black Americans, and it's not that that's the only type of music we're making. Whereas I don't make that kind of music. I just put an album out that had, no cursing, no violence, no nothing in it. But that, and plenty of other artists do the same. But that stuff doesn't get the shine. It doesn't get invested in. It doesn't get promoted. And so why is that? Why is it that, we have this cultural movement that is something that, Black folks really built into this force that has now like taken over the world, but we don't have any power or control over it. So, that's just my 2 cents on that. And, just to sort of start wrapping this up, I'm going to, use an example of something local, a way in which Jewish supremacy and influence finds its way into local politics and affects local Black communities. A lot of people know I'm from Jersey City. And in 2018, there was a situation where 2 Black people came to a Jewish deli and rolled up in a moving van, had a lot of heavy artillery that nobody really knew how they could have gotten it. They were not residents, or they weren't locals of Jersey City, weren't from the neighborhood, anything like this. They just rolled up with a moving van full of weapons and shot up this Jewish deli randomly. And the story kind of disappeared very quickly, but there was a woman by the name of Joan Terrell Page who was a school board member in the ward in which this incident took place, and, had been a community servant for, I think over 20 years. I don't even know how long she had been with the city, but had made a positive impact on the community and, was well loved and had been, it was elected to the school board by the people of the community. And she came out and made a Facebook post essentially saying that while, the violence is indefensible and it's disgusting and it's wrong, but we also have to question why this situation would happen in the first place, and why there might be a sort of ambivalent or indifferent or less than sympathetic response from the Black community. And she pointed out that a lot of Jewish landlords and homeowners had been coming over from places like Brooklyn and harassing the residents of Jersey City, the Black residents, to sell their properties to them, and that if they wouldn't sell the property, that they would then traffic prostitutes and drug dealers into these neighborhoods to drive the property values down to the point where they couldn't sell the property, or they would have to sell it at a loss. And this sort of bullying tactic. And so she basically was just saying, like, we need to have this conversation. And due to this Facebook post, the Jewish mayor of Jersey City, Mayor Steve Fulop, he publicly called for her resignation from the school board. And, the school board was supposed to have an open public meeting to discuss this and to allow people to voice, people in the community to voice their opinions. And they canceled the meeting the day that it was scheduled to occur, because they didn't want to hear from people. After the responses on social media, I guess they felt like they didn't want to hear from the community. And I personally had a speech prepared that I was going to show up and speak at this event. And, that was it. Like, it was just, she's out of here. And, I can't think of a situation where, like Malcolm was saying, I can't think of a situation where Black people would be able to force an elected Jewish representative out of office. I could be wrong. Maybe it's already happened, but I think that it's one more example of this sort of disproportionate influence over our things that go on in our culture. And so to wrap this up, Jewish people often, not all, but, a lot of Jewish people often openly espouse this idea of their intellectual and genetic superiority over other ethnic groups. People like podcaster Brett Weinstein, for instance, have openly stated that Jewish overrepresentation in elite positions of power in government and corporations and academia, that this is merely due to the fact that Jews are genetically more competent and intelligent than other groups, and that this basically explains away this idea of why Jews have so much have so many high status positions. And this is exactly the sort of like supremacist ideology that this country claims to be against, right? Like, if you are espousing this sort of genetic ethnic superiority over other groups and using that to justify why you should have authority over them, that would be unacceptable from any other, if it were vocalized by any other group in this country. And yet the group who refers to themselves as God's chosen people is tacitly allowed to just spew like pseudoscientific nonsense that really sort of mirrors these ideas like phrenology. That was a pseudoscience of the late 19th and early 20th century, where they said that black people were inherently inferior to white people, that the shape of our skulls and the size of our brains made us genetically less intelligent and closer to animals, and that was used to justify slavery and justify our subjugation. And yet you have people now in the 21st century who are openly saying that they are just genetically better than you, and it's fine, and you're not allowed to push back or question it. So again, like, we'll close with that. And I think I just think that this is a super important conversation to have. I hesitated to do this on the first episode just because I do understand that a lot of people will have very like visceral reactions. But one of the prankster mottos is you're either on the bus or you're off the bus. And I'm trying to kick as many people off the bus right off the out the gate. And if what I'm saying and my honesty and my opinion, I'm not calling anyone slurs. I'm not calling for violence against anyone. But if my honest opinion, offends you or turns you off that much, then this show is just not going to be for you, and that's fine. I want to rock with the people who want to rock with me. So, I'm comfortable with people being offended or, not, calling me out or whatever, and we can have a conversation about it. That's why I'm doing this, man, because I feel like it hasn't been discussed in depth by any of, even the black conservatives. I discussed this with a guy named Anthony Brian Logan, who, I have some respect for him. I lost a lot of respect for him based on his response. I called into his show about a year ago when all the Kanye stuff was going on, and I was sort of like saying the same stuff that I'm saying now. And he sort of said like, "Oh, you're just blaming the white man," and sort of like wrote me off like I was like just some zealot, whatever. And it's like, nah, man, like if black people can hold ourselves accountable, why can't the Jewish community hold themselves accountable? Why can't they have honest conversations about what the perception of them is from other communities? Why can we not discuss this? So that's it, man. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on on X, I guess you'll call it, Twitter. I'm Foster the Prankster. You could just Google me or whatever. But yeah, let's have a conversation, man, and let's leave me comments, whatever. This is Foster the Podcast, episode 1, signing off. Peace.